Welcome everybody to tonight's I&E Network broadcast. My name is Dr. Lee Jensen, and this is the Inspiration and Encouragement Circle. We've been hanging out together for years and years and have recently we've done shows and webinars for 7 years straight. This is in September now will be the beginning of our 8th year. And we're a talent discovery circle. We try and help each other discover we've got some ability, do whatever we can to master and develop that ability, and then turn around and learn how to share it in the marketplace and see if we can improve how artists do with their business and their marketing. In my own case, this all started as a hobby, something that I absolutely loved doing, and then it just sort of got carried away. It just kind of took over my whole life, and I left dentistry years ago and moved over to starting to do my own custom engraving business and to build that business worldwide. And that process has been such a fun adventure. It really is the path less traveled, but it sure has made all the differences as well. So those of you that are over on YouTube watching or that see this a little later, at some point, welcome. It's good to have you involved, and welcome to the film strip. All of the guys in the show are regulars that have figured out how to use this new electronic technology and jump in once a week to participate, and I sure do appreciate your participation. It's not easy to carve out some time out of everybody's busy life and spend some time interacting together. What I do are shows and concepts about shows that I think really are helpful. It's how I navigate this. I'll be going through my life and living, and then all of a sudden something will come along that really is appealing to me and kind of kindles the fire or rekindles the fire that allows me to continue to go after something that's important or something that matters to me. And as we start out tonight, we're doing a very special kind of show tonight on a subject that I think is really exceptionally important. So let's get this lit up here. One of the concepts that we've promoted and kept in our circle and talked about often is this one step at a time idea. Usually in the beginning stages of a new project, we forget that it's one step at a time. We're looking down the road so far and trying to see what it will eventually accomplish and mean for us that we forget that the only way things really work out usually in life is to come back to it, and come back to it, and come back to it, and go after it one step at a time. And to me, that's really the secret of what we're going to talk about tonight is how in the world can you take your own imagination and your own thinking and pull it in a direction where it will literally help you accomplish maybe more than you thought you could. And when we're trying to take on unusual subjects and unusual concepts, one of the things that we talk about often in our circle is the peacock feather. This is the one concept that bothered Darwin more than anything in his theory of evolution. If evolution is something, then there should have been a disturbance in the production of peacock feathers. That somehow 2 cells can come together and grow to 4 cells and grow to 8 cells and grow to 16 cells and multiply and replicate a point to create a peacock, and then grow each of these individual feathers. And as they grow out in the RNA structure, they all have that same look. and they're long and they're iridescent. There's almost nothing in nature quite like a peacock feather, and yet they have pictures that are 5,000, 6,000 years old of peacocks, and the peacocks and the feathers are the same then. And of all the places where there could be a breakdown in an evolution and a change that we could document and verify and follow, it should have been right here. And it disturbed him a great deal because it just doesn't quite add up. And for most artists, peacock feathers have quite an appeal. And as you look at what you're trying to find in your own life, I think the secrets that are locked up in the peacock feather are the same secrets that are locked up within each of us. Trying to find, we've talked a lot the last couple of weeks about trying to find what next you're going to take on, what next you're going to do, what kinds of things can you pull into your own studio, your own productivity, that are things that, first of all, you would enjoy doing, but second of all, would have probably some economic value. And when we do our mixing and our talking and our discussing together, there's always more there than I think most of us realize. I had a really special lunch today. I got to go to lunch with Craig and Lance Larson. Lance is here for classes with Craig for the week, and it's the most interesting thing to have known each of you at a distance and become such friends and such great relationships, and then have you actually get a bear hug by Lance Larson. He is a big boy. He is a mountain of a man. And it was so fun. He brought this stock with him, and we took a look at it Monday when he first got here, and then Craig sat down with him, and they're going through some rather aggressive art concepts and carving concepts that I think you're going to see quite a transition now. And he spent some time with Lance's work, and he spent some time with Robin on Friday and Saturday to get some additional staining and coloring ideas from Robin. And so it's a joy to have the occasion to actually meet you guys and interact with you. And last week I missed Thursday's session. Got a call from the family that invited me to come over to Lance Turner's house and acquire some things out of his life that the family didn't necessarily want.
We missed last Thursday also. We had technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties, did you? I noticed that when I came back. I was going, well, I'm pleased that we can't always, it just doesn't always light up no matter what you do. It drives you crazy. But we're doing a little better overall. We're getting there a little bit further all the time. But it was hard for me to walk around Lance's home. This is his studio, his famous studio. This is the guy that came up with Charlie Sunkist tuna icon, advertising icon, and also Smokey Bear. And that was his cantilevered up in the trees kind of studio. And it was hard because I've been in his home many, many times, and it's just not the same now because he's not walking around with you and showing you off his things. He did these two bronze dogs that are his favorite things in his life, his dogs, his hunting dogs. And they're on the back porch right here over by his master bedroom as you come out the back door. And it was so interesting to I stood right here in his studio, and everything is gone now. There's nothing there anymore, and the family's going to sell the home, and everything just takes off in another direction from that point forward. But our memories of Lance and his influence on us will continue because Craig and I were talking about it at lunch today, how you could never sit down with Lance and not have the conversation come from an unusual angle. He would trigger your thinking and nudge your approach to ideas and concept, particularly from an artistic perspective, till it was just unbelievable. And what a gift for all of us. And to have his his tools of his trade. I stood there when I saw that no one had taken them. And I mean, Lance trained first as a draftsman, and he was a very accomplished architectural designer. And for nobody in the family to want these tools, his drafting set just shocked me. I was just absolutely, totally surprised. And Tammy got a bunch of his paints and a bunch of his charcoals, and got his easel. Tammy has his easel that he painted on. And his daughter came out and said, you know, I think that my dad would really like that you have this. And she gave Tammy his apron, his painting apron, and she just cried. It was such a neat exchange and such an incredible moment, because it felt like we were still involved in his life and involved in his circle, and he's contributed so much to the I&E network and its beginnings. Most of the early masters, all a great deal of Lance Turner's advice and counsel. So if we start talking tonight about where your dream is going and what you're trying to accomplish and how can you constantly stay with it. I've been doing an awful lot of thinking this last year about the dream itself. And the dream never really is reality. It will veer and it will slide and it will roll into something else before it becomes reality. But boy, some dreams are so strong and so enjoyable. I woke up in the middle of the night last night, was up for 3 or 4 hours till 3 or 4 in the morning, thinking about the last season of the dream that I would like to accomplish. Really has a great deal with everything that's going on right now. I've never been in a time in my life when I've enjoyed more what I'm doing, and yet never had a time in life when it wasn't as much of a struggle. So the contributing and production part of dream chasing is the work part, the part that you've got to get some things done, you've got to get some things accomplished, you've got to find a way to gather the resources you need. Lance mentioned at lunch today that he told a friend, I think it was, that he was coming up here and taking a week off of work and traveling this far and spending this kind of money to get some training. And the guy said, geez, can't you just do it for nothing? And it's so hard when we talk about what you have in life that you could get for free is usually not worth an awful lot. And in our circle, some of the things that you're going to acquire and enjoy have required someone else literally years to develop those individual skills. I talked a lot about how your days begin, and when I start my fall show series, I go into a period where I try and help you design one perfect day. If you could have one perfect day from morning till night, every minute of it went in the direction that you wanted, doing the things that you enjoy the most, how would that day be? And what out of that day, you live the rest of your life and say, well, I'm only going to have one more really great day in my life. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you could acquire the kind of general tendency of how you want to take your days and which way you want your days to go, then you suddenly have a target. And even if you can't do that kind of a breakfast, that kind of a beginning, that kind of a day, every day, surely you could do it once. And if you could do it once, then could not you get it done twice? Then could you not do it once a week? Maybe. And so you start to begin to develop a habit pattern of how you would most prefer going at your living. And if you don't know what are the things that you enjoy the most, then what you do is you do your digital journal, and you're adding over in that journal things that you prefer. You'll begin to see a pattern of preference. The things that really do turn you on, the things that make each day a little more worthwhile. I don't know how you go at life and living without a positive thought. If the first thing you do is get up and look at the news every morning, you're making a big mistake, because that just sets off the stage for me. All they promote and sell is negative. And so I try and control the beginnings of my days pretty carefully. I look at the kinds of concepts that I enjoy doing the most, and I go in that direction. It's so interesting to me is that I find the concepts on the web. Once I decide the show and the theme and the concept for the show each week, then during the week these kinds of things show up constantly that reinforce the idea that I'm talking about. And I think, well, isn't that interesting? Isn't that unusual and unique that I would see these kinds of quotes that fit so closely and are so closely aligned with the project of one step at a time, getting things accomplished in our efforts. And the great one step at a time person in our circle is Keith Holm. And the three of us, Tammy, Keith, and I, started doing the training together. It was really Tammy and Keith. I can't take much credit. They started the first classes at the encouragement of Sarah Raines from Dallas, Texas. Sarah was just getting started and she needed more help, and she says, I'm coming to Utah and I want to have some hands-on training. So we lit up the home studio, and we've been teaching there now for over 30 years. And if there's one person who can represent this one step at a time kind of concept, it's my friend Keith Holm. He literally has the kind of disposition that's just one of a kind. You wouldn't suspect that he has taken his life as far as he has, but he discovered that it was this kind of a secret that makes everything possible. You don't have to do it perfectly the first time. You don't even have to do it perfectly the second time or the third. And Craig and I were laughing today how many times he would take things and do it over and do it over and do it over until he got it right. And one year for Christmas he gave me this is my nameplate on my business desk. It's a triangle of walnut, and he carved the deer as it's changing its step. As it walks, it changes the muscles, and the position of everything changes in the process of the deer making its moves. Now, to do a study like this, you guys all know how much time this piece took to do. And then turn around and give it to me as a gift was just one of the most precious things that I have in my life now. And we were, from the very beginning stages of the company, looking very carefully at the idea that when you come into our lives and you want to try and accomplish something, if you'll just take it one step at a time, you've got a really good chance of making things actually work out. Keith has uncovered in his own life the real value of developing an artistic skill. And Lance and I talked today at lunch quite a bit about the idea of getting more art skills, taking now a beginning drawing class. Drawing and sketching is the foundation of all art. And when you begin to touch that side of your life and understand truly that you can do it, you could learn to draw, you could learn to sketch, and then begin to realize, Craig always talks about when he started doing it really regularly every day, then it improved dramatically. And I sketched in our drawing class, my first drawing class, I went once a week faithfully for a whole year, and I didn't make very much progress. It was just discouraging. And then when I started to up the repetitiveness, I started doing a little less time, but a little more often, things really started to change. And we talk continuously about how you shouldn't chase someone else's doing because it sounds cool that they're doing it. You need to stay squarely on what thrills your own heart. The things that draw your attention, the things that are attractive to you, the stuff that you collect constantly in your journal is what will begin to signal you perhaps what ought to be your subject. I counseled with Lance today again that he's now getting strong enough. He's doing pretty well with his carving and his studio business now. And the really important thing is for him to begin to look and zero in on what's going to now define his career. What is he going to end up ultimately one day becoming famous for? If you'll stick to what you love doing, the odds are much better that, first of all, you'll be really happy doing what you're doing. And you can see how young we all were back in the days when the saw cut started. But Keith has stayed with it and stayed with it and stayed with it and stayed with it till he's finally, he really has something absolutely dynamic in his life. Do something each and every day to move your skills along. You need to get really good at what you're doing. And Keith was a student of that. He lives that way. It's not just a once in a great while when he can get at it kind of thing. It was his everyday involvement. We believe strongly that there's an artist hidden away in everybody. But for some reason, it's us that's got to dig that out. We've got to be the kind of person that says, geez, I wonder what else I can do. And if I can make that work, then there's got to be something else completely. This is one of Tammy's earliest classes. And you can see who's, I don't know how we worked it out, that this side didn't stay with it and this side did. This is Jim Sigg, famous knife maker and engraver. This is Al Holm, the leading Western designer in the furniture art world, and now doing his bronze and casting art. He and Mary are on the Google Plus stream all the time. This is Craig. Gosh, he looks young there. This is Greg Woodard, world famous bird and falcon carving artist. And oh, and Greg, God, I just saw Sunday, Greg's got another pop in Southwest Art this month. So that's back-to-back months that he's been representing Southwest Art. And Keith and Tamarie, and this is the famous Sarah Rain. Sarah has passed away now and moved on to the great engraving studio of the sky. For Tammy and I, there's just almost no way to thank Keith for all he's contributed. They travel a great deal together. They've taught in hotels. We taught in Marriott Courtyard hotels for several years. I just all but wore them out, sending them all over the country to teach. We've taught classes in all 50 states. And the time we get to just sit down and do the artwork together is just precious time. It's the thing that we have enjoyed the most, and we try to get to it as often as we possibly can. Keith has a story that he tells to every new student, my courses or Craig's or his or Tammy's, and he was trying to figure out what to do and which way to go, and he finally decided he wanted to do a clay class to learn to design with clay. Just about every great carving artist does a clay model of what they're going to carve first. And so if you shape it out of clay and you can do it well there, then the odds go way up that you can actually carve and sculpt it in whatever material you're going after. And it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. We always look at it like, oh, that just takes too much time. But what it does is get in front of your own individual productivity. And it makes it a whole lot easier to actually do the job of what you're trying to accomplish. And so he was taking this class from Stan Johnson, and Stan asked them all if they wanted to do this and to make any money at it. And there was a guy in the class said yes. He says, and I do an hour a day. I put an hour a day into my artistic business effort. And Keith said at that moment, I decided that if he did 1 hour a day, I could find 2 hours a day. And from that point forward, Keith would make a minimum investment of his engraving, carving, artistic business efforts at least 2 hours a day. And we've shared that with so many people for such a long time, and it's a little hard to realize whether that's how can you make a business work with less than 2 hours a day. And I realize if you've got a job in the real world and are working still for a paycheck, a couple hours a day is a pretty heavy investment. Very, very challenging for most people. But if you're under that level, it's probably going to stay a hobby. It's a magic little line in the sand that just about everyone who rolls on and becomes a master in our program have suddenly discovered that this kind of commitment, this kind of dedication, one step at a time, is what really does actually produce results. And there's no question that it's not easy. If you're going to uncover and open up new doors and new opportunities, then you've got to develop new skills, and that is always difficult. You're not very good at it in the beginning stages. You do more of it, you'll get a little better at it, and soon you begin to uncover a level of craftsmanship and skill and ability that perhaps you didn't even know that you had. Keith got to a point where he was beginning to do these carvings. This is called release. And he would carve the squirrel right out of an existing block of wood, and then that paintbrush is carved and the palette's carved. And these are just stunning pieces. This is my piece here. And when he took it down to Sedona, Arizona, and began selling in the galleries in Sedona first, and the person who saw his piece first that owned the gallery jumped up and he says, who did this? And I guess there were quite a few artists. They were taking a class down there on how to market your art, market your work. And Keith says, I was scared to death and embarrassed to even say that it was mine, because he had never shown it before. He had never sold it before. He had no idea what he even had. And this gallery owner said, this is one of the most unique things I have ever seen. And I always tease Keith because he's a marketing genius. He doesn't have to do the really difficult parts, that tail. And because he pulls it out of a block of wood, the whole world knows that that's a wood carving. And isn't that the most amazing presentation? Now, if you can figure out how to do release with the work that you're doing and do a similar kind of an idea, how you've always presented yourself and your work, maybe you should change it. Maybe you could tweak it a little. Maybe you could turn it into something of this same sort, because Craig and Keith and Al have all made a career out of doing a release version of custom individual artwork. And anyone who's ever spent some time with Keith, I know Nick's been here and taken some classes, anytime you've able to spend some time with Keith, I think Joni Beck came out also and got to spend some time, you'd never forget this guy. He is just the most amazing individual, quiet and unassuming but helpful. Oh my gosh, he will go to the end of the earth to help you. But on top of doing all that helping and that teaching, he has continued to develop. I doubt that he doesn't hit it just about every day, and still is doing that. He spends so much time trying to work through the process of the artwork and doing what he enjoys the most that it's just always impressed me. You can't hurry this up. This is not something you can shift into high gear and just throw it together, which is kind of how most of the world really functions anymore. And so if you can somewhat sense that's okay, I got to spend some time and make some investments here, once you see that your skills are growing, then you're hooked. Lance and I talked today how there's just no way. Everybody now is going to literally, he will continue this regardless of what all the rest of us do. He's far enough along and enjoys it enough that he's going to continue to do that and develop his artistic skills from right now on. Now, Keith only has one major fault, and that's that he loves Pepsi, and I like Cokes. And so we've warred over Pepsis and Cokes for about 35 years now. It's been a lot of fun. And this one day I'd go over to his studio, and he had some skin cancer taken off, and his face was really badly bruised on this side here. And so I went out and looked like I'd popped him over the Coke and Pepsi war, and we had a lot of fun with that one. We were going to the Sculpture in the Park show in Denver, one time, and I found this in Steamboat Springs. And if there's anything that talked about a person like Keith Holm, it's the advice from a tree. He went on some training courses. That was his collegiate university training, was in woodshop world, and he went back to Kentucky to the National Arboretum training program. And so something that come out of a tree is pretty interesting, and how this was written and laid out, to me, is just one of the most enjoyable little quotes. Because if you can remember your place among all living beings and embrace with joy the changing seasons, for each yields its own abundance, the energy and the birth of spring, the growth and the contentment of summer, wisdom to let go like the leaves in the fall, and the rest and quiet renewal of the winter, boy, you start to really have a different outlook on your own individual living. But when you see something like this that really zeroes in on the preferences that you're already exploring, my encouragement is to try and get to a point where you could recompose this and make it just your advice. You see how this person has already done their version, but there is no reason that you can actually do something different that is basically motivated by that. Excuse me. Keith was the person who literally opened up the high-speed wood carving world. I didn't know much about wood. I had not used the high-speed Turbo 300 on wood yet, and Keith was the one that actually did that. And not only did he do it, he stayed with it unmercifully. This guy was just so turned on by what he was doing and what he was learning. And he was a relentless thinker and contributor. He would call me often and say, Lou, I thought about this, and I solved this problem, and I've solved that problem, and we need to do this, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. And I always would chuckle, because if there was any way to challenge Keith Holm, just tell him it couldn't be done. And he would just lock himself into it like a pit bull. He came up with the idea of trying to figure out how to use high speed to carve into existing wood surfaces that were finished, like a guitar or a piano or a shotgun, and do ivory inlay. And that he spent 3 years digging at it to try and figure out how to not only do it, but do it better and do it better and do it better. And he just mastered the whole subject. And if you can take someone's monogram and put it on their shotgun, their expensive shotgun in ivory, they go crazy. So then all of a sudden you have something really significant to share. And every time we would move into a training course, when you come here and spend some time with us, I know it's really difficult to do that, to take time and travel from wherever you are, but to come and sit down with us, we're really sure that we can help you learn and help you actually get started. And so there's a lot in our network who've made that investment, and I think they can say they really got a great return out of it. Doc and Dee McNeely were patients of mine. This is Dee McNeely here, and that's Doc right there in the back. And they moved to Las Vegas before I ever even started working with a high-speed drill. And then they were doing really well. And Dee came to me one day. She says, "Can we start teaching classes in our studio in Vegas?" And she says, "I think people would actually rather come to Las Vegas and take training and play a little while they're here than come to Utah." And you know what? That worked extremely well. And so Keith would take his fifth wheel and go to Vegas and train at her classes down there, and then I would come down sometimes. This is Wade Griffiths. He would come down and teach. Craig often came down and taught, and we did that for quite a number of years. This is Bill Janney right here, the famous Bill Janney. Was just barely getting started in those days. And this is Dr. Frank Knopp. He's a pediatrician. He delivered Ken Brown's children. Kind of fun memories. They go way back. Keith stayed squarely on the things that he was most passionate about, and trees were the center of his life. He couldn't walk past a tree without examining it. He just absolutely loved trees and leaves. And then he started working with different unique combinations of how could you carve this leaf and then add the shading. And then when you do a presentation of this leaf, these are just sample practice pattern pieces. But he would do it, and then he would do it, and then he would come back to it. This 3-leaf set, I'll bet he's carved that 500 times to try and get something that he was really pleased with. And most people, all they do is a little bit here and a little bit there, but Keith would stretch it. He would do it one way, and then he would do it another way, and then he would try it even another way. And when you can start to realize you could carve one side and then flip it over and carve it another side, this probably started out as a 3/4-inch piece of wood, and then he would shape and reduce it from there. Gosh, you can come up with such amazing combinations and amazing looks. I know for a fact that he reworked this design often and would take it to try and see where should the leaf positions be. And how could you rearrange this carving? This is an actual overlay, so this would be appliqued onto a wooden surface rather than drop relief carved into it. But this is really a blend of both, and this was a drop relief carving this was huge. This was about 1 foot by 6 inches, and these were large-scale carvings. And it gradually evolved into more and more complex and more beautiful kinds of artistic expression. This one, when you carve this as a sample practice piece, you'll never come down. It is one of the most enjoyable carvings I've ever done in my life. But he never met a feather he didn't like either. When we took him to Disneyland the first time, I took him to Disneyland in LA and to Disney World in Florida. And every time he'd spend all his time running around looking for leaves and feathers because they were all over the place. But see, this is released. This expression is partially out of wood and the feather itself. And when you can kind of figure this designing kind of ability and concept out, there's just no end to the application. You could use it on just about anything and everything that you wanted to work with. He's also done enough of it and enough teaching that he's really good at sharing what he's learned. And not everyone has that kind of ability. What a treasured friend. He is just amazing. I found this quite a while ago. This Roger Merrill's is a movie producer, and he made this statement. I've used it in my book, Opportunity Intersection, Making Your Life Your Art. Early in my career, I came across the words of John Muir, the father of our national parks. I love nature, but my vision of the wilderness was nowhere near the ecstatic level of his. So I walked in his footsteps for 1.5 years, and it changed my life and soul forever. The first thing I discovered was that it was my eyes that were clouded, and that nature and life really were just as beautiful as Muir had described, if I was open enough to see. The second thing I discovered was Muir himself. Here was a man who walked in nature, saw its beauty, and let it fill him up. It overflowed, and it came out in everything that he did, in the way that he hiked the mountains, in his political activism, in his writing, in his business. It all came out of his entire life. Muir was a man who made his life his art, and that was a staggering concept to me. Making my life my art became the cornerstone, one of the cornerstones of my creative vision. Now, I don't know how you can do your life from here on out any better than that. And one step at a time really is the secret. I watched Joe Cummings go from being building contractor to where he is now with his artistic skill and ability. He had carved this stagecoach out of walnut first and sold that, and then he turned around and done 5 of these, I think, were bronze castings, and so this was his first bronze. And he stopped by the studio to Keith's place, and we were all there at that time, and Joe's just taken his life and gone on with it dramatically so. He loves doing what we're doing. He teaches an awful lot now, and yet to discover that he actually had this kind of ability, he couldn't remember even the numbers on the burrs for a long time, but he knew what they would do because he had worked with them so much. And so when you started out in your own life one step at a time, the idea of spreading it and having influence other people and their lives one step at a time, to me, seems to be a rather amazing process. And every one of you should look forward to that in your own circumstances as well. If you can see this carving here, he's done that sunflower a dozen different ways. And as he learned how to do that and then how to shade and stain and finish, he literally started changing the course and the look of almost everything. This was a drop relief leaf in this big plate, this tabletop. We still have it. And it's just, he carved those leaves all the way around that outside border and literally shaped and dropped relief in a finished wood surface, guys. That's what's so unusual about high-speed power carving, is you can take those ideas and turn them into something that you probably never dreamed you could before. And if you'll just realize what you're playing with here depends on your own one step at a time kind of an effort. But one step at a time is how it literally works. When you're consistent and when you're persistent and you make those steps determinedly on a frequent basis, regular basis, there's nothing out there that you can't get done. We started our carving in 1991, and we've trained well over we're trying to decide what number we should add it up to now, because it's got to be way beyond 3,000 people have come and taken our hands-on courses at the famous Holmes studio. So, even though it's uphill, even though it's a challenge, even though you tell yourself, I don't have 2 hours a day, I'm going to challenge and encourage you to find the time. Make the time. Put some effort in and really elevate your own individual skill this year. Don't just hit it a little bit whenever you can. Determine for yourself that this is where you're going to get. You're going to get to a point where you can really bang this stuff out carefully. Now, this is the class, I put this into my course, and this is one of Keith's more famous design sets. And this one is really attractive, but it's where we start. We try and have you learn to sculpt on an overlay basis in this range very, very quickly. And once you can do that and get good at it, the rest really starts to drop into place in a hurry. We also start you with his ivory overlay if you come and take his ivory inlay class. Now, this is the one we're trying to develop this year, where we will film it and put this on the web now, teach you one-on-one wherever you are. So we're trying to figure out a way to do this and make it work out well for everybody. Begin to teach the ivory inlay course via the internet. You walk in and sit down at this studio, and that little plaque is laying right on the side on the front of the podium. And he went to great lengths to do all this kind of stuff. Everything he did was extraordinary. It's a drop-dead, beautiful deep relief carving. We went on the road. We taught everywhere. This was the course we taught in Reno one time, and we all went down and got that one done. This is Nick's class when he was here for his week-long class. Crazy bunch, but oh, do we have a good time. I don't know how this exactly got started, but I can sure attest to it, because if you literally, it's accepting of who you are and your circumstances that you have to live with and deal with in life, but boy, the more you can go after your own unique expression, therein lies your art and therein lies your future. I don't know what the I&E network will become in the long run, but I'm going to spend every ounce of my effort until my last breath trying to help the cooperative association of each of us work better. Because I don't know a single thing that can help us accomplish this goal any better in the process of doing what we're trying to do. All right, gang. I'd like to talk a little more about one step at a time. So if you have something that you can share that has been that same process and degree, produced a degree of success for you, I'd like to throw up your hand and have you comment. Ronnie? Don't have a mic, Ron.
Yeah, that would help, wouldn't it? Not that anybody wants to listen to me, but I think anything you do has to be one step at a time. I can remember when I started teaching myself how to use the scroll saw. It was one step at a time, and I'm, I started that, didn't know what the blades were, didn't know what a skip tooth blade was, what a precision ground blade was. I just took some blades and started cutting wood, wanted to cut out these folding trivet baskets, and went for the hardest thing ever to start with. Sure. And then later on I found out, well, you should have started with the easier stuff, but I was already past that, so it didn't matter. But it was one step at a time, and I can remember back then I'd put 3-4 hours a day just working on that scroll saw in the basement when I got home from work. And that's the way I learned. And but it was one step, and then later on another step, and then I learned how to do this, and I learned how to do that, and I learned how to take the stuff I was doing and stack cut it, and then production work. And it's the same thing when you start engraving. It's one step at a time.
When you went down and started with Ken Brown, that first little bit was pretty intimidating. And yet, if you take
intimidating. I'll tell you, it was the learning how to engrave calligraphy was the hardest, easiest thing I ever learned in my life. And that sounds dumb to say that, but I was always used to being able to do everything my whole life until I took Ken's course. And it was like, I don't have the touch for this. I can't do this. And I kept doing it and doing it. Now, after 3 days, there was improvement, but it was like, no, this is not easy. And then I started doing the lessons to get certified, and I'd send my lessons in, and at that time, you had to send the actual project in, and then he'd send it back to you and critique it. Well, I got 3 pages of 10 or 12 point type, single spaced, critiquing my work, and it was devastating to me. It was like, I can't be this bad, and I could have quit several times, and he never eased up on me. But all he was doing, if I was going to be recommended by him to do work, he wanted me to do the best I could do. And he made me the best I could be at engraving the calligraphy. But again, it was one step at a time, and doing one letter and doing it over and over and over again. But it was hard. And once I got over it, it was the easiest way I had to make money in my life. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. And if you get the sense that that's okay, if you can just deal with the idea that one step at a time, I'm going to get this. Most of you, well, all of you that are in the show tonight have that temperament, or you wouldn't keep coming back. We've had such a challenge trying to learn how to use webinar-based, internet-based formatting for our meetings and our get-togethers for 7 or 8 years now. And boy, some of the early efforts were just a joke. They were just ridiculous. and that you guys have all continued to come. You've continued to try. You've participated. You've shared. I don't know how many calls I've had with Mel and Nick to try and help me, or interactions with me to try and help us figure out the technology, because that alone has been just a small nightmare. And yet we're getting a little better all the time, and it's certainly fun to do. There isn't anything I do now that I enjoy more than coming at it every Wednesday and Thursday and trying to do something that I think maybe will help. I don't know how each of you learn, but most people, all it takes is one little aha moment. They've not thought of it before, but all of a sudden now it shows up and they decide, oh my hell, that's where I've been missing, right there. And that's what I try and cover each week, is something that will literally trigger a thought in you to go back and hit it again. I don't know if I've got a member of the network I spent an hour with a couple of days ago on the phone talking about her sandblaster and trying to help her get it up and running, because she's quite new at this and she's just so frustrated and struggling so much because she can't quite figure out the subtleties of what it takes to sandblast. And I sit back and go, well, when we were trying to develop the blaster to begin with, we went through hell for a couple of years because we needed to solve this problem and we needed to solve that problem, and then figured out how to actually make it work. And there's still, even with as much background as I have in sandblasting, every now and again there's something new that shows up that I just throws me for a little while. But I know that one step at a time I can likely figure everything out. Isn't that how it's worked for you too, Jay? You've made a lot of progress the last couple of years. You're taking it one step at a time, aren't you?
Oh yeah, I mean that's the only way I can do it. I mean, for me, a lot of mine started back, 4 years ago when I was in the hospital, and first time they got me out of bed just to try to walk again, it was, I think I covered maybe, I think it was like 8 feet from the edge of my bed to the door of my room. And that was my first time up, and it took all I had to, to do that. The next day, it was like, hey, I want to take a step outside the door. I want to take 2 steps down the hall, and it just, over and over and over again, learning how to walk again. And I treat this the same way, each day, just taking another step and learning how to walk a little further.
And then you start getting a vision that you can do and do more. And then you start having this range of vision that I think I can do just about anything that I set my mind to doing. Then's when things really get fun. And all you have, I know you have that same kind of background and that same kind of experience. Don't you, Dean, when you're working with the things you take on, every time you learn something new, you do it one step at a time, don't you?
Well, I think that's life. I mean, anything that you want to do, you have to lay a foundation. You can't lay a foundation all in one slab, so to speak. You've got to work at it a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
What you were saying and what the others have been saying about having to practice and learn as you go. And that's just normal for anything in life. I mean, so it can be frustrating. Lord knows it can be frustrating.
Yeah.
But there's something about it. There's something about it that just keeps pulling you back too, though. It's like a fungus. It grows on you,
Well, maybe the relationship and the connection with each other, that to me helps sustain coming back to it.
Definitely.
Because we're all going through that same battle zone, that same struggle. And I found that when I started carving smaller and engraving smaller, that's the part that pushed me the most. But I like tiny stuff. I always have. And so the second I started engraving under a microscope, it just was like, oh, okay, boys and girls, I was born to do this stuff.
Never done that. But one of the things I have to guard against is I'm a perfectionist at heart. Okay. Yeah. And so you have to learn to know when good enough is good enough, or you know what I'm saying. I mean,
and not unravel yourself because it doesn't turn out perfect every time. Yeah. Keith and Craig and I were talking today. Keith put a lot of sample pieces in that fireplace over there and burned them up because he wasn't happy with how they turned out. And I think that's true for everybody. Maybe not for Joni Beck, though. Joni, you've just mastered everything you've tackled, haven't you? Turn your mic on. Turn your mic on. There you go.
I said I wish I could say that, but there is no such thing as really completing it, because you think you've done a great job, and then you still have to say, oh, well, I bet I could do this a little bit better. Oh, I wonder if I could do that kind of thing, and then I go into it. And that's what keeps me going. And I'm a perfectionist, but I'm not perfect. And it drives me crazy, but I love it.
Well, we're all crazy in this bunch. That's just okay in our circle. That's exactly.
And I will say this much, and I just said it the other night with Ron and oh good lands, Mel and them the night last week. Anyway, what you guys have talked about and what you have shown me, and how you would answer some of my questions, and I could call Mel and I could call Ron, and ask, well, what did you do for this, that, or the other thing? Because I was at a point I didn't know how to get to it. And they're always willing, right there, and they help, and they're right there to help me. And it's just enthusiastic to be so great and such a wonderful people. It's a great place it's a wonderful place to be in on and to join.
Yeah, we have had a good time over the years.
Yeah. Oh, and I think we're going to try to come out there this year.
Oh, wonderful, Joni. That'd be great to have you back. Second time you come, honey, is really wonderful. We have lots who just can't not come. Once you've been here and been in this valley, it's beautiful here, and to learn a new skill or to basically touch base again is really, really, really productive for all of us. So we'll look forward to that if you can work that out.
I sure hope so.
So what's been a big struggle for you, Rod, as you've tried to move your career along a little bit? Have you got particular stories that are like these?
Yeah. When I was carving limestone, one of the biggest projects I took on was a 10-ton piece of stone. I'd never attempted anything like that.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, if I just do a little bit each day, I'd ride my motorcycle over to the site and work on it a little bit each day, just a little bit at a time. And I was able to complete a 10-ton pound stone.
Yeah. And that's just damn near the most perfect example of the whole idea, because you can eat an elephant one bite at a time, and if you'll take it that way, you can. It's just how it works. And I don't know. I do know people, I don't see it in myself so much, but I do see it in other people that take on more than they can chew, and they choke. They just literally frustrated because they can't get it in an hour and a half or a day and a half, and they don't have the patience or the determination to just stay with a little and stay with a little and stay with a little more till it actually ends up being successful.
And don't give up.
Don't give up. You just can't not back off. You've got to come back at it and come back at it and come back at it in order to make it work.
And I've appreciated the encouragement and inspiration.
Well, that's when finally I wanted to call it something. I mean, we've helped each other for 35 years now, and so when you're trying to look for some kind of a definition, it needed to be defined. And when I finally came up with encouragement from Bill Janney, and then I stumbled on to putting I&E in front of it and turn it into inspiration and encouragement, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you title it any better than that. And that's what Mel Joins is so good at. Inspiration's for yourself. That's your own turf. No one can inspire you. You have to get to a point where things inspire you. But then you get to meet someone like Mel Joins, and someone who constantly makes the effort to share themselves and to move things along. And you are the best at that I know, Mel Joins.
Ah, heck, it ain't nothing.
Nothing, the hell it isn't. I know better than that.
Oh, I've gotten phone calls while I'm driving down the road from Johnny Beck, and I've had answers for her.
I'd say that.
The biggest question I ever had was while I was driving here in North Carolina. She's in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see my screen?
I'm going to shoot you.
And I said, yeah, sure. I can see it, Johnny. Right. But
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You start out with a spark of an idea.
Yeah.
And you let that idea build a little bit until you can put it down on paper.
Okay.
Then you refine it while it's still on paper.
Mm-hmm.
You get all the little bugs figured out and what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Then you transfer it over to whatever medium you're working with. And you take your time. You don't rush. You take little strokes instead of trying to hog out a big section at a time. And with that, in no time at all, you've got a perfect piece and you're finished.
Yeah. One step at a time. It's just very, it's so practical that most people overlook it. They almost, you forget that that's how it works well.
Well, in the beginning, I did a little bit of wood, but I was playing with chicken eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And practicing with chicken eggs. You know, blow them out, clean them out, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd be carving a design in one, and the drill would, my hand would be a little too heavy and knock out a chunk I didn't want knocked out. Yeah. And I'd take it and hold it in my hands and go. And my wife would just cringe.
They're easy to dispose of, aren't they?
It's an egg.
Yes.
Eggshell. What the heck?
Eggs break.
It's not a piece of art. It's an eggshell.
I've always wondered about eggshell carving artists because that's just such an eccentric thing to do. You just
got to be OCD.
Yeah, it has to be. It just has to be. But it's fun to play with that direction.
Well, ECD.
ECD. Yeah, that's probably really close. So, Nicholas, have you done similar have you got a story where you pulled off something more than you thought you could by taking it one step at a time?
I guess when you've been talking about it, I've been fairly lucky that, yeah, I do approach it that way, but my first attempt at it tends to go quite well.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's trying to repeat that becomes the challenge for me.
Wow. That's an interesting thought.
You know, it's like everything just fell into place, everything went well, and I created what I wanted, and then I want to make a second one.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I start thinking about it too much or what happens there, but it's, for me, like the second incarnation of the piece, you know, when I'm starting to do the second ones or more, that at times become more of a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're a very precise person. You're very, very careful, and then replication of that expression. That is, I think we all struggle with that. I sure do. Mm-hmm. I've done some things in my earlier part of my career that I just can't even do now. I have things that some of my engraving on my crystal pieces are just, I know darn well I don't have the hands anymore. There's no way I could pull some of that off. But it's sure fun to play with the idea of, yeah, I'm going to do this, and 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 hopefully get myself to this point. So.
Yeah, I guess I found I can't do crystals, so.
Well,
too heavy a hand. I was talking with Mel and the others when we did finally get together, and Rod last week.
Last week.
Yeah. It's like I can do eggs without a problem, but it seems like as soon as I start carving glass, my mind shifts. It's like, oh, I can carve a little bit harder, except it's not a little bit. It ends up being a lot.
Well, I think you ought to drink more Coke then, Nick. That would help. I think that would get you right through that.
Yeah.
I want to show you this is the Coke Pepsi can that Keith made for me.
But you had a splash of Smirnoff with that Coke.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that, Mel, but I didn't know if I'd suggest that with Nick or not. He's kind of a temperance guy, you know, but.
Well, you know, a little bit.
You never know. A little margarita now and again, this solves a lot of problems, doesn't it? Keith cut this Pepsi can out, and the Pepsi can is overlaid on the Coke can, and cut that out with the high speed. So we got absolutely drop-dead gorgeous margins.
Wow.
And you can't hardly tell that the two are sandwiched together. Now, this was in our early days when we would try and challenge each other as to who could do what.
Yeah.
You know, and when you think of things and say, I wonder if I can do that, I guarantee you the first one of these didn't turn out well, but he stayed with it. And he just wouldn't let go. And that's the kind of temperament that Keith Owen really is. And we challenged each other. We would basically decide, I think we can do this, I think we can do this, I think we can learn that. A lot of times it would come as a suggestion or a question from a member of the network. And that's a great motivator. That really does get the juices going when you start thinking about, I wonder if I can make that work. And I wanted to show you before we finish the show tonight. These are Lance's stabilizing pads, and they're full of buckshot, and they're really, really heavy little leather pads, and he uses them to stabilize each of his projects. And this was his T-square. And when he was teaching, every time he would teach, he had this with him. It was a part of who he was, and I'm going to engrave his stuff in the Smoky Bear on here. I'm going to make this a permanent memorial to him. And then look at this precious little box of his toys, you know. And I just went, Tammy says, I think you were supposed to have those. Because I love playing with these kinds of tools. And to be able to know that Lance played with these for his entire life. He really was a genius at his architectural effort and his drafting. So, when those kinds of chances and opportunities, this whole thing came into my life because I just had a feeling I needed to go over to Lance's home last week, and I stopped in the night before, and his daughter, she says, Lou, she says, why don't you come over tomorrow night? We're having a private get-together, and anyone can purchase now the additional, anything that's left in the home that you want. And so Tammy and I went over, and what a joy. I'm just think I would have missed all of that. Oh, and I've got something so fun. Several of his books, his whole library was up there, and you could buy any of the books, and so we bought several of them, and we got the one book home and was looking through it at dinner, and it had been given to Lance Turner by Keith and Craig Home. How cool is that? That was just so fun to find out that we'd actually got that book back now out of his life and going to go down the road with us. So when those great moments hit, lean with your inspiration, lean with the things that you really enjoy the most, and I think you'll end up being fulfilled perhaps more than you ever realized to begin with. Anybody else got anything you want to share tonight? I think we about wrapped it up. Oh, I did have one more thing. I don't know how often you use your bathroom mirror, but I am unmerciful with a Sharpie pen on my bathroom mirror. I have done it for years. When there's something I want to really stay focused on. Lou Jensen's nemesis is too many things. I get going and going and going and get too much going. I can't do it all. And so what I try and do is harness and focus me and pull me back down to the doing of what most now needs to be done next. And I put it on my bathroom mirror and I write it on my car mirror with a Sharpie, and then it's right in front of my face almost constantly. And so really is a good little trick. If you've not done that before, it's a good idea to pull that into your life. Anybody else have a comment? Rod? Yeah.
Could I share a real quick story?
Do, absolutely.
I came across a lady, and her husband was a medic in the Army, and he came up with this thoughts for the day. At the start of the day, I do have a purpose today. During the day, I will work to achieve something important today. And at the end of the day, I have had an impact on someone's life both today and in the past. And it's by Ira Cookman.
Cool. Yeah, and isn't not that if you do that day after day after day, then I think you've done as much with your days and with your life as you could. The part that we share a lot that I don't see in other artistic circles very often is this sharing, caring, mixing thing with each other. And if there's anything that will help you individually to do better is when you bother to do that. It's just interesting how when someone keeps coming to mind in my life, I know that I'm supposed to stop my running around and make a phone call. And I'm pretty good at that, and I try to do that, and almost invariably the reaction is, oh my hell, Lou, you have no idea. You were just on my mind this morning, or I'm struggling with this issue, and then here you are. And I think there's something to that. There's something really significant that you hear a thought and you have an idea and you follow through. You see something on Google Plus and you make a comment and you follow through. When you post a comment on Google Plus, you have no idea who might bump into that. 300 million people on Google Plus every day active, and you don't know what you're going to say that might then influence. So you turn around and post what you just commented and said, Rod, find a picture, create a post for that idea, and then you turn around and push it back onto the Google Plus or onto the web later. You don't just do it once and then forget about it. It's like most of Keith Holmes' patterns have come out of several attempts at making it look a little better or doing it a little differently or trying this with it or trying that with it. And I hope that's what you got out of it tonight, is regardless of all that you've done already, there's still, you could change some things in your life that would respond in a way that might really genuinely help somebody else. And at this point in our life, I don't know what more we could do. If you're having a good time doing what you're doing and that's personally beneficial to you, that's one thing. But if it starts benefiting and helping somebody else, then that's better than money. There's just nothing better than that, I think. Okay, gang, I think we've had enough. I can hear a cob of corn calling me. Actually, I can hear several cobs of corn calling me.
Lou, don't eat us.
Good night, everybody.
I love this time of the year. The food this time of the year is awesome. Thank you, everybody. Catch up with you tomorrow
Good
night.
night.
Okay. See
Thank
you
you.
later. Good
Good
night,
night.
everybody.